Start recording. Thank you. We'll start with the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of Lummi, Nooksack, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended to this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. So I think we've got a quorum, so we can start on the first topic, and we're actually going to go back into domestic violence offender treatment. And Amy Roberts should be here to speak about some questions that we had about the new treatment programs, requirements. She was instrumental in getting the new WAC and stuff created. So Amy, if you're out there, if you could go ahead and join us. And I sent you a bunch of questions, and hopefully you can touch on those and what you've done and what you think could be done going forward. Thank you, Amy, for joining us.
Sure, yeah, I'm here. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to take a certain chunk of time today, or just answer the questions that came in, or how you want this to work.
If you want to answer the questions that came in and kind of what you've done in the past and what you're currently doing now, and then we can go through another questions session. It's an hour-long meeting. We've got some other items on the agenda, but I think you're primary here, so I'm going to let you just go with it and see where we go.
Okay, great. Let me go ahead. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yes, I think Jill can assist you.
Yes. Do you have the ability to share screen right now, Amy?
Nope.
Okay, let me promote you then. Just give me one moment.
While you're doing that, I'll just start yapping. So a few years ago, the department, DSHS, took on this task of revising the WAC for domestic violence treatment. That was in response to stakeholder requests. There were several stakeholders that were questioning the efficacy of treatment, and the WACs for treatment just hadn't been updated in almost 20 years. So it was time in many ways to update them. So as long as we were updating them, we decided to go for it, so to speak, to really go for what the stakeholders and the providers really wanted to see. We didn't want to just tweak a few things here and there. So we took some time and gathered some stakeholders and contacted and contracted with national advisors. We also did research on what was effective DV treatment, and I can share that research with you. And so what it came down to when the WACs were redone is it was not just a revision, it was a total replacement of what was there. So repeal and replace. So it's a totally brand new day for DV treatment in the last few years. It took about 6 months to get all of the programs up to speed on it. One of the questions was how many of our programs are up to speed on the new WAC, and that should be 100% at this point. So let me see if I can share my screen now. Yeah. Can you all see that? All right. So in the advisory committee, we had judges, probation officers, treatment programs, victim advocates, survivors, DOC, Just trying to think of everyone we had there, administrative office of the courts, all those folks came together and worked really hard on what the WAC should look like. And then we contracted with Dr. Chris Huffine, Dr. Ann Ganley, and Dr. Oliver Williams as well to give us input on the WAC. And those are big, big names in DV treatment throughout the country. So then we also went through a statewide rulemaking process, which included a lot of feedback from anyone, from the public, from treatment providers, from victim service agencies, from probation and judges. So we took in all that feedback, and that was part of the process as well. Let's see if there's another. This is more along the research. Someone asked in a question that got emailed to me, what research did you use to base the new WAC on? And I have to say a lot of research. So not just one piece of research, but several. At the end of the day, I don't think anyone has come forward and said, based on all the research out there, this is the one way to do it. That has not come forward yet. I don't know anyone who's drawn that conclusion. But what we do have is a lot of things in common from all the research that we've compiled. And one of those common things is that most research seems to indicate that using a cognitive behavioral approach to domestic violence treatment is best. So that's what we decided to do in Washington State. It was also noted in quite a few research projects that one size does not fit all, that these are complex cases. And other research showed us that domestic violence treatment has about the same efficacy as other treatments, substance treatment, mental health treatment, those kinds of things, sex offender treatment. So you're looking at about 75 to 80% success rate. And in domestic violence, I would say that probably rests really heavily on the level of treatment someone qualifies for. So we have 4 levels of treatment in Washington State now, and they are progressive. So the lowest level, level 1, is for folks who have the lowest risk and need. So those folks are going to have a higher efficacy in treatment than the folks who are at the top end of that spectrum, if that makes sense. I'll just stop the share for now. I have several slides I can show you. I do have one more that I want to show you. But I'm not sure where it's coming from. So maybe if I bring it up, that'll help. There we go. When we're looking at someone who comes in for domestic violence treatment, usually we're looking at folks coming in through the justice system. That was also one of the questions. Every once in a while, we get someone brought in through another system, sometimes DCYF, sometimes walk-ins, just folks who want treatment, although that's rare. The majority of our folks are coming in through court referrals. Now, when we look at someone who comes in for treatment, typically on day 1, we're not dealing with someone who's coming in and saying, yeah, I really need help. I've done some things and I've made some mistakes and I don't know how to handle myself in certain situations and I need help. That is highly unusual on day 1. So what we usually encounter are people who are resistant on day 1, who have a lot of other things, a lot of other factors to factor in when we do an assessment on someone. And these are just a few of them up here on the screen. So we're looking at folks with different educational levels and learning styles. They may have issues with drugs and alcohol or not. They may have mental health needs or not. Some of those mental health needs are on a spectrum themselves. They could be anything from some mild social anxiety to full-blown personality disorders, right? So we're dealing with a whole spectrum there. We're looking at cultural factors, age, ethnicity, LGBTQIA. We're looking at all those different things, people of color. We're looking at their strengths and motivations for change, whatever those are at the beginning. We're also looking at their trauma history, their criminogenic needs. These are all things we're asking about in their assessment, but they also just show you how complex and different each person is going to be. Really is no one size fits all. So that's why I share this slide. All right.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Do you have more information on some of the questions, or should I?
do. Yeah, I'm just pulling it up now. Someone asked about specific treatment plans for perpetrators, because some of them don't believe they have done anything wrong. How do the counselors get their serious cooperation for change? How long is their treatment, and what does it cost? That's a great question. So as I stated before, a lot of folks come in with that resistance on day one. So this is what sets, I think, domestic violence treatment providers apart from a lot of other types of providers, is the specialization in how they handle this specific thing. So we take them from being resistant to taking accountability at some point along the treatment line. How that's done is usually through group. That's why group treatment in domestic violence is emphasized and so important. They hear other people in group talk about, this is what happened with my situation. And when I first came in, I didn't think anything was my fault, you know, and they share their stories and they share their accountability, what they've learned so far. And then the new people start to hear that and start to shift in their thinking and eventually come online. That's typically how it goes. Some of our facilitators are more confrontive than others, but I think at the end of the day, everyone gets to the same spot in a slightly different way. As far as treatment planning goes, that might be the initial treatment plan might be to accept responsibility or take accountability for the participants' part of whatever happened. And we're not usually talking about just one incident. I realize that in the justice system, you all are looking at a specific incident. In treatment, we're looking at their lifelong behavior patterns. So it's not necessarily just one thing that happened. So that's important to note as well. How long is treatment depends on what level of treatment they're put in. As I said, they can be put in one of 4 levels. The first level is a minimum of 6 months. Second is 9, third is 12, and the fourth level is a minimum of 18 months. So it really depends on what level they are put in as a result of their assessment. How much does it cost? Varies by provider. I know most of our providers do have a sliding scale fee. Some of our providers offer scholarships, things like that. It really depends on where you go. Right now, we don't have any state funding to give to have contracts with providers. So we don't have the ability to kind of set that cost or tell them you're going to get reimbursed a certain amount or something. So these are all private businesses that develop their own costs. That makes sense. Anything else along from that question or from the person who came up with that question? Anything else?
Go ahead, Arlene.
Okay.
Are you also doing individual therapy along with group therapy?
That's a great question. Sometimes, yes. When it's, one of the great things about the way the WAC is worded now is it gives providers the ability to do that when it's needed. And if it's within the facilitator scope. So all of our providers are credentialed counselors through DOH, which is a really important thing that I can't emphasize enough. And then usually with your higher risk, higher needs, so level 3, if you have someone with antisocial personality traits, if you have folks who have a long rap sheet with things other than domestic violence, you're getting into some areas where some individual counseling could be very helpful along with the DV group. And our providers now have the flexibility to do that when it's needed.
How do they get trained to do this work? Who trains them and where?
Great. So Washington State has one of the most rigorous training criteria in the entire nation to do this work. As I compare Washington State with other states, I'm in shock, actually, at what other states don't require for training. In Washington State, we required new folks in DV treatment to do 30 hours of domestic violence intervention treatment. So that's 30 hours of training on how to do this kind of work specifically. And then in addition to that, another 30 hours of victim advocacy training. And they get that training usually through their local victim advocacy agency. In addition to that, that just gets their foot in the door where they're having to be supervised 24/7 doing anything. To get to the next level, the staff level that we call it, and to be able to facilitate groups on your own and things like that, you have to add in 50 hours of experience doing this work and 50 hours of experience doing victim advocacy. So we're adding in 100 hours of experience plus those 60 hours of training before anyone's going to be doing a group by themselves. That's a lot compared.
Yeah, it sounds good to me, what you're saying, because I think this work is very difficult.
Yeah, as someone who's done the work myself, I come from a unique perspective. I've been a victim advocate and I've been a domestic violence treatment provider in another state before I moved to Washington. And I think I can offer the perspective to our programs of, I know what it's like to be in those trenches. I know what it's like to deal with some of the really difficult clients and then the pressure that is put on from the entire system. And I want to make that point that in order for domestic violence treatment to work, just like when you send someone to drug court and you're hoping that works, we need everyone's cooperation. We need everyone to be on the same page as much as possible. So that means, swift action if it's needed with the courts or with a probation officer or something like that. I keep getting feedback even now from some of our providers that say, this person just got started in their DV treatment. They kind of dragged their feet. They really delayed. They only have 5 or 6 months of probation left. And when that's up, the probation officer is going to cut them off. And so there's no chance they're going to finish treatment with me. And so I'm still getting reports of that kind of thing happening. And that's what I mean, where we need to have some cooperation of the whole system. Any other questions on that?
Stephen Gockley.
Amy, has DSHS engaged in any conversations with the healthcare authority or with any of the Medicaid plans to provide coverage for this treatment? Locally here, that's one of the big obstacles, as you mentioned, the lack of any payment structure for this.
Yeah, that's a great question. That would have to be done through the health insurance commissioner. And I was part of a statewide gender and justice committee group that was looking at different ways that we could address these issues. And that was one of the options that came up as a possibility. Should we be asking the insurance commissioner to add domestic violence treatment to say all insurance companies in Washington state have to cover this? Or should we be going in a different direction and getting the money in a different way? I don't think that has been decided yet, but it's definitely on the radar, so to speak. Yeah, that's not really my decision, but I think statewide, the whole committee is looking at that.
Thank you, Amy. I do have a question. On these treatments, is there a special treatment available through these programs for cultural, ethnic, or language barriers?
When there are enough people who fit a certain demographic and they want treatment separately, then yes, our programs typically will do that. Most of the time, I'll say most of our programs don't have enough participants to divide people up in that way. I do know when Wellspring was still up and going in Seattle, which they're not anymore, when they were, they had an LGBTQIA specific group that met for DV treatment. And I got great feedback about that, that was wonderful for everyone involved. We do have some programs that specialize in languages, for example. So we have some Spanish speaking programs that are specific for Spanish speakers. If you go on the DSHS website, and the way you can get there is Google it, Domestic Violence Intervention Treatment, Washington State. It'll come up. You'll see our website has a list of providers, and you can look at the list by name, city, or county. When you pull up a list of providers, it will tell you at least what languages they speak at that program, and it will let you know any specialty populations and whether or not they provide services online. So those are important things to look at. I think most programs wish they had enough folks to have specialized groups, but most don't.
Thank you, Amy. Stephen?
Amy, before we lose the thread, would you send Jill Nixon that website? And you said you had some of the research that underlay this. If you could send some of that to her also for distribution to us, that would inform us at another layer as well.
Sure, I would love to. I do have one pulled up right now that I could share. Let me see if I can do that. And I'll be sure to send it to Jill anyway. So let's see. I'll just share the screen then. Sorry, y'all have to watch me go through putting everything down. All right. So this particular piece of research, let me make it bigger, is from the Battered Women's Justice Project. And it was done through a grant with the US Department of Health and Human Services. And it's fairly recent compared to a lot of other research. But what I like about this piece that I'll send to Jill to distribute out is that it references several other researches. So it's a rabbit hole you can start with. That's what I like about this piece here. And it covers an introduction that goes all the way back. How did DV treatment start? What language do we use when we're doing DV treatment? What types of DV treatment are there? What are the theories behind them? I'm scrolling through here quite quickly because it's very long. They're going to give you studies that show positive results. They're going to show you a lot of Dr. Ed Gondalf's studies and things like that that just give you a good foundation for what works. And then they're going to compare DV offenders to other violent offenders and tell you the differences and similarities. They're going to give you some information about what men in the programs and their partners say. And then a conclusion, an implication for policy development. So this is the kind of research that we based a lot of our decisions on. So I will have that sent over. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions specific to this. I know I flew through it.
I think one of the questions that we're kind of trying to get out of talking about domestic violence, our last meeting we had Bruce Vangelup and Jake Webush from Whatcom County explained some of the programs we actually are currently using, what we have, problems. And the committee wants to know what is it that we can recommend to the task force as a whole in order to help make sure things are working. And as Stephen mentioned earlier, funding is a big problem, especially with the concern with, like deferred prosecution would only be option for those that could afford it. So it leaves out a lot of individuals that might be able to continue on if they had the funding to do this. So that's one issue. The other issue is there's not a lot of providers out there that meet the state requirements. And so Whatcom County has a DVRMRT program for those that still need treatment, still need help, but they can't afford the treatment that's available that's state certified. So I think we're looking for some guidance on what is it that we can do to make sure that those that want treatment, those that are ordered to have treatment can get what's out there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to touch on all of that. The first thing that stands out is the use of MRT as I completely empathize with and understand that folks need treatment. And if they can't afford it, what do we do with them? I think we need to come up with a better answer than MRT. However, I don't have that answer out of my hat here. But I will say that in sex offender treatment, we run into the same thing. But I don't know of any courts or probation offices that will allow people to do an alternative sex offender treatment. They are required to go to someone who is qualified to do that, no matter what the cost. And I'm not sure how folks juggle that, but we're in that same boat with DV treatment. I do want to show a quick screen here. Share screen again. So when you're looking at alternatives to certified domestic violence treatment, you're looking at MRTDV or anger management. And I want to show this table because it really shows how different they really are. There is no assessment required for MRT or anger management, so you're not getting that piece of mental health, substance treatment, coordinating with those other programs. You're not getting the same level of victim contact and input throughout treatment. There's no continuing education requirement. And most importantly, in my book, is anyone doing anger management or MRTDV, they're not required to be a credentialed counselor with DOH. So if someone has a problem, number one, they're going to be afraid to say they have a problem because they don't want to tell anyone that they have a problem with a probation officer. That's a really risky thing for a participant to do. But in addition, if they are brave enough to say they have a problem, they have nowhere really to go for oversight of a credential because they don't have a credential from DOH. So the DOH credential is actually more important than most people think. In addition, we have all the training I talked about earlier in doing certified treatment. So it all brings me back to, I don't have the answer out of my hat right now, but I do think we have to come up with something because I'd like to see people get the best treatment they possibly can. And letting them do something different isn't in anyone's best interest. I'm kind of bracing for and kind of cringing for the day when something terrible happens to a victim of a participant who is not in certified treatment, because I don't know how anyone's going to answer to that. Yes, we put them in a treatment with people who aren't credentialed counselors. Yes, all these things are a no on this table here, and we were aware of that. So that makes me nervous. That makes me really nervous. And even if let's say best case scenario, that doesn't happen, I want victims to be able to feel comfortable calling the DV providers and talking about what's happening currently. And I want the participants to feel comfortable to challenge their provider if they think it's not going the way it should. If they have a complaint, I want them to feel comfortable. Right now they have my office to call to say, I don't think this is right. Can you look into it? So I wanted to share that real quick. And what was the first part of your question? I want to make sure I got that.
We're just looking for direction on how to gain support so that there's equal access to domestic violence treatment that's state certified. And it seems like a problem not only financially for the defendants that need the treatment, but also lack of providers. If everybody was able to get the treatment because they could afford it, would there be enough providers that could do it? And it doesn't seem like there's enough providers for a lot of different areas that we deal with in criminal justice.
Yeah, that is area specific too. Some areas have an abundance of certified providers and some areas are lacking and some areas are kind of just right. So I would like to be able to spend a little more time on that. As I mentioned, I'm the only person where I work who does this. And so I'm certifying programs, investigating them, reviewing them, serving on the committee for WAC changes and all that kind of stuff, and other statewide committees, also doing bill analysis when it comes in. So all that on my plate means I don't really have the time right now to go and like quote unquote do recruiting. I would love to go to master's programs and PhD programs and say, hey, a lot of you don't even know this niche exists and it's really exciting and here's why I loved it. So we do have a statewide committee or group, I should say, that has formed as a nonprofit, and it's a bunch of DVIT programs that have come together, and they've said, let's form a nonprofit, let's bring in trainers, let's see if we can recruit more people to this work, let's do that kind of stuff. And they just got up and running. So hopefully we'll see some production from that. I know in your area, you've lost a few over the past few years. And when the pandemic hit, to be honest, 20% of our providers folded right at the pandemic because of the pandemic. So that was a big hit that we haven't recovered from yet.
So
it is on the radar though.
The pandemic has probably made it worse. In terms of numbers, and the two things that you're talking about that are lacking are funding, and providers, which is two not small things, but very big things. So yeah, I appreciate the difficulty of the situation you are in, but at the same time, I'm really glad that you are in that position.
Well, thank you. I'll do my best as long as I'm here. And I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. This is my passion. And I do look forward to the day when either that group of providers or my office or anyone else who is a stakeholder can really get into that recruitment process and bring new people in. I'm already asking our providers, is there something in the WAC that makes it too hard for people to start this work? I'm asking for feedback right now about that, just to see, is there anything we can do from my end to make it easier? But at the same time, we're like, but we have these really great standards that aren't met anywhere else in the country, but are they too big? Are we impeding people from coming in? So that's a question we're asking ourselves.
Thank you. Stephen, I see your hand up.
I'll try to squeeze two questions in. Amy, we've gotten a lot of benefit in looking at our drug court program from comparing nationally recognized best practices to what we've been doing locally. Are there nationally recognized best practices for DV treatment? And you don't have to summarize them, but if that's a resource you could provide us, if there is, that would be very helpful. My real question is, the other thing we've noticed is how many people we're dealing with and preventing and reducing incarceration have multiple factors complicating their situations. And we know that mental health treatment without treating co-occurring substance disorder is not effective. So you've mentioned criminogenic factors and other complications with DV perpetrators. My sense, and Lisa may know better than I, my sense is the judges basically make a referral to DV treatment sort of as a check the box kind of thing. Are there screening factors that would suggest maybe somebody shouldn't be referred for DV treatment before some other factors are dealt with? Or is that just a matter of leveling them, level 3 or 4? So yeah. I'm wondering about that.
That's a great question. The reason why our assessments are designed the way they are is specifically for that purpose that you just brought up. We get folks walking in the door and we have no idea all the other co-occurring needs that they have. So our assessment is set up with 7 main domains, and we go through the big ones. So we go through mental health, substance, trauma, all that kind of stuff. And then we do, evidence-based testing on top of that. And the reason why our assessments are designed that way is for that specifically, because we don't know what's walking in the door. And I think it's okay if someone is charged with domestic violence offense to go into DV assessment. That's what they're getting first. It's just like with a substance assessment. You send them for an assessment to see if they need treatment, and if so, at what level. We do the exact same thing in DV. They come in for an assessment, we're looking, do you need it? And if so, at what level? Because there are some times when they don't, when they need something different, and our providers can tell you that as a result of the assessment. The other question about, is there a national standard or a national best practice that we can look at? I wish. Boy, do I wish. I was just talking to David Martin, who's with the King County prosecutors about this like 2 days ago. And we were just talking about his involvement in getting a group together for the national NIJ, National Institute of Justice, or something like that. He's like countrywide, we need to be having this conversation. Where are the national standards? What can we be doing as states to meet those standards? They just don't exist yet. And that's a real shame, because they exist in several other areas of treatment, just not DV yet. So I believe we're going to get there. I'll just say, I think we're at the very first steps of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to throw you a curveball, and you can tell me you can't answer it at this time, and I won't be offended.
Okay.
It really isn't. I don't think this is where you're coming from or what you're doing, but because of the new police reform laws, there's some concern for the victims out there with not able to pursue certain defendants. There was recently a case in Bellingham where there was an individual that made some felony threats. I think Flo might be able to give more information, because I'm just going off memory and I don't have all of it. But the victim was located, but they couldn't pursue the individual, and the victims were scared. Do you have anything to add on that, Flo, to my question? I know I'm just kind of throwing it out there, but just concerns if you have ideas that we can do to help with these issues.
Oof. You know, I wasn't aware that that was happening. Is that something that is happening in your community specifically, or is that nationwide or statewide? Do you know?
Flo, could you address that?
It is happening in our community, and it is happening statewide because of the new legislation. And we're still dealing with this gentleman today. He's out on, well, actually he was booked yesterday by Ferndale, but he'll be released again, and he's targeting family members.
Oh, I will obviously have to look more into that. I am aware of the new legislation that came in. I haven't looked at it as closely as I need to yet. I will say that from the DV perpetrator treatment perspective, from this side of the wall, I'll say that our number one concern, our number one objective is victim safety. That's the whole reason why we do what we do. And so I don't know what kind of creative techniques we can get to maybe defer someone into treatment in lieu of getting a charge. If you can do that, like pre-charge, or I know that's something I've talked to a few people in King County. They've got that idea in their head. How can we make that happen? There's in Canada, they do that on the regular. There's a whole group of an area around Toronto that does that, where pre-adjudication, they get folks into treatment, and their motto is sooner is better. And I would agree with that. So they found a way to make a deal with the offender to say, look, you can avoid these charges if you go into treatment. But if you don't go into treatment and you don't finish it, those charges are going to come down, and we're going to deal with it in court. And that seems to work really well for them. I know we're looking at that as a possibility here. Yeah, it's outside my scope, but I do see it being looked at. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, thank you. Jill, can you, I'm sorry, I was looking for the calendar and I'm missing it. Is our next September meeting a joint meeting, or is that in October?
The September meeting is a joint meeting.
Excellent. So we're going to touch on domestic violence and what we can do at our next September meeting. If you would like to join us, you're more than welcome to, because there may be more questions. It's going to be a joint meeting with behavioral health. And I think what we're really looking for is direction. Is there things that we can do with the WAC or future changes? Is there things that we can help and direct the task force to get funding, to require insurance companies to cover people that need the treatment, protecting the victims, making sure there's adequate providers out there. So as everybody can think on this, Amy, if you can give us some responses later on to if you're not able to come, just to kind of make sure that we're in the right direction, what the next steps are for our community and this committee to try to get more help out there for domestic violence defendants as well as the victims.
Yeah, that's great. If you send me those dates, I'll definitely look into it and see if I can come.
Thank you, Amy. Is there any questions from anybody else on the panel that have for Amy before we let her go?
Hi, I'm Maya from the Defender's Office. Hi, Amy. Thanks for presenting. Are you aware of any courts throughout the state that are like domestic violence courts that do diversion or work specifically with domestic violence crimes?
Yeah, in Seattle, there is a court that's doing that right now. Judge Eisenberg is the one to get in touch with about how he's doing that court. And it's a DV court specifically. And they contract, they have some money. I don't know what grant they got or something. They have some money to do this. They contract with 3 or 4 different providers to do assessments and treatment. And I think they're having great results as a result of that. So Judge Eisenberg would be a good person to talk to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions, Stephen?
Just to set up that joint meeting conversation, I realize I have no idea how many cases we're talking about here in Whatcom County. Is there a way maybe Maya or Prosecutor Ritchie or court administrators that we could get some data in our hands before that conversation so we know what the number of cases we're dealing with? And I don't know if that would make a difference, but it would sort of illuminate the terrain a little bit.
What data would you like?
How many DV charges are we facing in a year? How has that changed over the last couple of years?
Okay,
You can get that, Eric?
I think so.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
I also put in a request last week to Administration Office of the Courts to come up with a lot of different data. They're working on a query for me. I'm hoping it'll be done within the next week, but they needed some more information from me. And some of the DV statistics for the state are already available. We get a monthly report. So some of that information is already available, and sure Eric can help out with Superior Court data and anything else that he may be able to grab, but hopefully I'll have some more information for you.
Thank you to both of you.
All right, I don't see any other hands raised on this topic, and just food for thought for our next behavioral health meeting. If you guys have questions, ideas, thoughts, please get them to us so that we are able to make sure that those questions are answered and addressed at the next meeting. We'll go on to number 3. I would like to thank Amy Roberts, and we really appreciate your participation in this meeting today.
All right, we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. The next topic on our agenda is external communications and engagement. This came from the June steering meeting, and basically we're looking at suggesting contacts who might be interested in reviewing the information that we've been doing as the task force whole, as our committee, and any ideas on who we should make sure this information is available. So any thoughts, questions on that topic? I'm seeing no hands. Maya, you're kind of giving me, please help. So they're asking for assistance on making sure that what we're doing is out there to the public and to different areas. So if you guys think of anything, make sure that you get it to us so we can bring it back to the steering committee. We can bring it back to the task force as a whole. I don't think we're going to spend a lot more time on this topic because I don't see any other hands raised, but just keep it on your brain and help us out when we do have information on that. And the next topic was the American Rescue Plan Act funding. How can we use those funds for public health programs and public health data with criminal justice aspect? Any ideas or thoughts on that topic?
Remind me, Raylene, how closely this needs to be tied to pandemic recovery activity.
I think a lot of it came from the pandemic, that there's funds available to help on areas that lost funding. Bruce, I don't know if you're still there, but I want to say some of that information, because we were looking at trying to get more funding back for DV, and I didn't think that was available. Can you help me out on that? Am I right? Am I wrong?
I'll add that we've been talking to StatPol about this, and it's pretty clear that COVID needs to be related to COVID.
Just to let you all know, if you have your packet handy, that information is on packet page 12 as well.
So I'll just say we heard that funding DV treatment is a big need, and we've lost providers due to COVID. I don't know if that's enough of a sequence or if it's a priority that we would make a recommendation about. That seemed to be right in front of our faces.
I concur with you, Stephen. I was hoping that maybe when we got to the behavioral health and trying to get providers and making sure that there was treatment available, I definitely have concern that there's more mental health issues out there due to COVID and people being isolated. I could be off on that, but I don't know if there's ways that we can use funding to get that data. Is there any thoughts on that? I just think maybe we need that data to see how it's affected people's mental health. Everybody's so quiet. Are they all here?
Well, I mean, we know that there's a very large uptick in requests for mental health treatment and also crisis calls. So the statistics already established that the problem exists. So then the answer is not to get more statistics, but to provide services that are needed. Most of the providers have waiting lists of people to be seen instead of being able to see people immediately. It's very difficult. So if we're going to spend money on something, it would be to get more providers so we can provide treatment.
Thank you, Arlene. I think we're going to just go ahead and move into other business, because I think a lot of this stuff is going to be talked about again at our next joint meeting, and the other businesses agenda items for our September joint meeting. Another concern that we haven't really brought up, and I don't know if Eric and Maya can give input on this, but more on the juvenile side, it doesn't really seem like our committee has a lot of input from juvenile court, superior court on what happens with the kids. And maybe if they're suffering from mental health or issues with everybody being isolated at home. Is there stuff that we can do to prevent future issues with our youth? And is there any ideas on what we'll be discussing at our next joint behavioral health meeting?
Well, I appreciate you bringing up youth in this conversation because I think they are often a population that doesn't get considered. I'll say that, looking at the filings in juvenile court, they're very low, and they've been down through the pandemic. And I don't know if that it's interesting. We've talked a lot about why that might be, and it's like kids aren't at school, and so there aren't referrals being made from schools, although really those had been on the decrease before COVID because schools were pursuing different ways to address disciplinary issues rather than calling law enforcement. So Eric may have some insights, but I can't say the why, but I can say that numbers are certainly down, and juvenile court is really focuses on rehabilitation and treatment, much different than adult court. I think I'd love to see a youthful offender court for people aged 18 to 25 who fall into that category or still in brain development, who probably could benefit from a more intensive and differently focused court experience than, for instance, maybe more mature adults. But besides that, I guess those are sort of my observations and comments of what I see happening.
Thank you, Maya. Do you know of any courts that are doing that, like a youthful court?
I know that Stark has told me about a court, and I want to say it may be in Arizona, that focuses on youthful offenders, kind of more like our drug court, kind of where they have intensive case management, and maybe more like our juvenile court. So in the state, I'm not aware of any, but I think that like the case law that's come out of the US Supreme Court and our Washington Supreme Court certainly support looking at youthfulness and brain development and immaturity. And, I've got resentencings for minors who were sentenced as adults, like all of that is really the wave of the future, and the way we should be looking at people in that age group is really working with them closely to try to change those behaviors, because they still have impulsivity and issues that make them less culpable, for instance, than individuals who are older.
Thank you, Maya. I think it'd be interesting to bring that up at our joint meeting and to see if there's a way to look at doing something like that and getting more research on that court and seeing how that works. Any other questions or thoughts for the next meeting or on Maya's comment? Well, we have meeting set for a full hour, and I think we've touched on everything. Is there public comment?
Thank you. We have a couple of attendees at the meeting today. If any of you would like to speak to the committee, please press the raise hand icon. And no hands are raised.
Thank you, Jill. Just keep it in your heads of the next meeting coming up. If you guys have any thoughts on changes that we need, communication or American Rescue Act funding, get that information to us so we can provide it at the next meeting. And thank everybody for joining, and the meeting's adjourned 12/24 on August 10th.